Strengthen me, strengthen me, strengthen me with raisins.
One of the concepts that we need to wrestle with in order to properly understand God and his nature is that to be God, who created everything, including the universe and time and space and matter, he necessarily is bigger and outside of those things. And this is something that Paul Vanderklay discusses a lot when he talks about the various aspects of God and talks about his qualities as being arenic, as in the arena that we live in, versus agentic, as the agent who works within our environment. And one way that I think can make this a little bit easier to think about, or at least could help us to understand and have some new ways of pondering this, is thinking about the concept of the microbiome. Because as human beings, each one of us has a unique microbiome. And while we may have something close to 40 trillion cells in our body that are part of our body, and each one of those cells carries our unique DNA, there's an additional 40 or so trillion bacteria cells that live in our body, but they're not part of our body. So in a sense, to the bacteria, we are the arenic God. And I think that, if we consider that our bodies are their environment, and they live in our bodies, and we do have a relationship with them, because these bacteria are necessary for many of the functions of our body. In fact, they're supposed to be there. Our bodies wouldn't work correctly without them. They help us digest our food. They help convert chemicals in our body from one thing to another for various organs to function properly. They are there to fight off unhealthy invaders, and lots of other things that they do. And so, we look at a human being and we say that is one person, but within that one person, there is trillions of other life forms. And we don't consider bacteria to be on the same level as humanity. And yet, a single bacteria has, in many ways, a similar function of life to an entire human being. They move around, they consume food, they expel waste, they work and do various functions, and they reproduce. And so the life cycle of a bacteria, if we wouldn't say it's exactly similar to the life cycle of a human, at least it's very similar to other living things. And we do have a relationship with these creatures, but it's very difficult for us to comprehend. For instance, the bacteria in our digestive system are responsible for sending signals to our brain to tell us when we should stop eating or when we should start eating, and they even help us or influence us to crave certain types of foods and things like that. And I think that if we consider as if we were the bacteria and we imagine this world that we live in and the methods that we prescribe to solve problems, perhaps we could gain a new perspective on things. For instance, the bacteria in our body maybe crave sugar. And to that bacteria, sugar is the only thing that it lives on. And so it sends a signal to our brain that causes us to crave sugar. But you, as a human being, may realize that you eat too much sugar. And in fact, because perhaps you've made a habit of eating sugar more than you should, you are you're enabling those bacteria to grow and flourish at the expense of other bacteria that maybe would cause you to crave healthier things. And so, we can see here how if the bacteria are sending signals to the brain is like a form of prayer, they're going to ask for sugar all the time. And when they get sugar, they're going to be happy, but it's not good overall because their benefit could come at the detriment of some others. And so I think it's the same way when we think about if we are asking God for the things that we want, pleasure or blessings or material success or any of that, sometimes we get those things. And it could be in a sense even that sometimes he gives us things that are not the best for our overall health because he loves us. Like as a parent, I should never give my children candy because it doesn't have any nutritional value. And yet, I know how enjoyable it is and how much, pleasure they get from having that. And so as an occasional treat, I'm giving them something that doesn't have nutritional value, but it benefits them overall because they get a taste of something, and maybe that's a taste of the way the world's supposed to work, that you always love everything you eat. And for some reason, our microbiomes are out of whack and we crave certain things more than we should. And if you think about, before the invention of processed sugar, that was probably a very rare treat. And the ability to have those calories that the body can use so quickly to produce energy, like that's an amazing thing. If you're out in the field and a long day's work and you get to have some honey or a sweet piece of fruit, like those sugars replenish you. And there's even a verse in the Bible where it says, strengthen me with raisins. Like a raisin is a power-packed little sugary fruit. And if you're really depleted, like that's going to hit the spot. But, if we're not taking care of our environment properly, which is our body and these microbiomes and things, then, the signals that we're getting from them and the way that we're responding could be totally out of whack. And, what can we do when we receive signals or prayers from them requesting this and that? We can either say yes or we can say no. Can we have a more fruitful relationship with our microbiome? I don't know. It doesn't seem possible because the distance and difference between a human being and a bacteria is so great. And so I think that in that sense, we can imagine some of the problem of knowing and understanding a God who is greater than the universe. And yet maybe it should give us pause when we think about tragic things that happen and why doesn't God intervene? Or why doesn't God give us the thing that we crave? We have to realize that our perspective is so small and so tiny that we need to trust that he's taking care of it. Because perhaps for God to intervene whenever something tragic happens, that would be the same as if, every time you got a sniffle, you started taking antibiotics. Well, we know that that's not good for your overall health because it harms a lot of those helpful bacteria in your body. Or, if you are tired and you decide to take a stimulant, every once in a while, maybe that's the right thing. When somebody's under a tense situation, like in combat, and they take a some sort of a stimulant to keep them awake, to give them energy, that could help them get through that. But when you become dependent on that and that becomes the norm, then it's not good. And so then to have the person in control of that craving say no, saying no is the kindest thing that we could do to our bodies when we resist those addictions or those cravings. And yet our bodies and the bacteria that live within them are not going to understand that no as a kind word. And so I think the amazing thing is that if we really consider it, like, you know, these bacteria and things that live within us, you know, they can also cause some serious problems. You know, like things like cancer. They can be caused by the influence of viruses, bacteria, things like that, working in our body and telling our body to act in a way that is not good. You know, because like the cells that are our body, you know, our various organs and things, they're all supposed to, the cells are supposed to die and reproduce, and they split and they reproduce and they keep the organ functioning. But if one of those cells decides that it does not want to give up its life and reproduce, you know, the right way, and instead it starts to grow indefinitely in its same capacity, then it becomes a cancer. And so, you know, we can treat those sorts of things with like these broad, powerful chemicals like chemotherapy. You know, it's going in there and it's just devastating a whole bunch of our body with the hope that it will also stop the bad actors, the few places where it's really doing some harm. And a better way, maybe, and there is actually medical people that are working on this, is trying to think that, well, we shouldn't just necessarily kill these things that are in our body because they're part of our body. They are meant to be there. So if we over sanitize, that does damage to our immune systems. If we use too much antibiotics, it can create superbugs. You know, things like chemotherapy have horrible side effects, and many medicines have horrible side effects. But there are some people that are saying, well, what if when somebody is sick, we take some of the microbiome from a healthy person and we introduce it, and the healthy bacteria will actually begin to reverse the effects of what's going wrong because they understand the way that things are supposed to be. And when they get into that chaotic situation that's making someone feel sick, they actually can do a lot of good. Now, the ultimate, but you know, that still is in a sense, you know, like they're doing things like fecal transplants, which is about as gross as it sounds, but it can be effective. But that's still kind of like, you know, painting the problem with a very broad brush. Because what would be the ultimate solution would be if you as an individual could control those bacteria or influence them more directly, because you have the conscious brain, and as individuals we have no idea what to tell the bacteria in our body to do, but as we learn how these things work and how to study them, perhaps we could influence that. And it's really interesting. In the book Dune, and the movie somewhat that comes with it, the super advanced humans, the Bene Gesserit, they have control over all the functions of their body, and they can regulate the chemicals and their hormones and their things. They can control when they choose to conceive and the sex of the baby and all this stuff. That's all part of the plot. But when Frank Herbert was writing that, they didn't even understand the microbiome concept. They thought everything was just chemical. But now we understand it's not just chemical. You can put chemicals in and it will maybe cause some of these bacteria to grow, maybe cause them to die. It'll prefer some over another. But these things have, to put it bluntly, a mind of their own. Maybe not a mind the same way that we understand. So to really conceptualize what a human being having total control over their body would mean that you would have to be able to, in a sense, have maybe one of your own bacteria, a bacteria that was part of your body. Maybe it contained your DNA, the signature that's in every one of your cells, and yet it took the form of a bacteria. And in the form of a bacteria, it could go down into the most individual levels and show the other bacteria how they are supposed to act and how they're supposed to live. And even if they are clinging to life when they are no longer producing health, it could show them how to die. And so, if it's not obvious, this is a way that we could conceptualize the concept of the incarnation. And, God being so massive, even him understanding the intricacy of everything that he created, knows that he didn't create us in a way that can perceive the giganticness of what's going on. And that's where you get into this thing of atheists and people that don't even believe that there is such a thing as God, because they can't even conceptualize how big it is. Because everything that is created must have a cause. It must come from somewhere. And there's a great philosopher that I've been listening to named Roy Clauser, and he talks about this, and this is the conclusion that most philosophers have come to over the years. Every person is religious. They all hold something to be divine, and what it is the uncreated thing that is the cause behind everything else. And we may argue about what that is, but everybody believes something. Even if you believe it's matter, you still are, in a sense, putting that in a religious position. And we can't pretend that we could understand what matter wants, even if that was the thing that we perceive to be God. But if God comes down to the level of being a human being and explains exactly what it means to be a human being and how to do it correctly, then this environment could return to a state of health and grow in the way that it's supposed to be. And so I think in that regard, it makes sense as well why we don't always see the miracles that happen overnight. God is doing things and he's moving in this world, but he's doing it in such a gentle way at times. And at other times he does act in a decisive nature, because there's some part that's not worth saving, because to allow it to live will cause more harm to the rest of the body. And so when God chooses to let that happen, we have to trust that it's because he has infinite knowledge and infinite wisdom. But we need to realize that the things that we ask for are what we think we want from God, is just as it's irrelevant to the whole picture in the same way as the bacteria that are causing your sugar cravings. And yet, because God is good, sometimes he does give us that sweet taste of sugar, the things that we need, because he does love us and he wants us to know. Even, I think, in that way, we can see that the little things that sometimes people will say are silly, but if you pray for something and it happens, why would we not assume that that is because God loves us, and that He, in His infinite wisdom, even knows how to take care of us, even though we're so many and we're so far away, and it's hard to figure out what blessing me might do, how it might do harm to someone else, or vice versa. So I just think that's a really interesting way to think about it, and even in practical terms of our own health. I think that perhaps the more we head in that direction of thinking that, to these bacteria we are gods, and we are responsible for stewarding our bodies in a way. And I think sometimes people make too much of a deal of health, but perhaps if we consider that it's not just our own body that we're taking care of, but it is, in a way, billions and trillions of microorganisms, and I don't know, perhaps those will be resurrected as well, so shouldn't we care for them? I guess it's a little hard. It sounds a little ridiculous to be saying that, but the more I think about it, and the more I think about just the pattern of how God works, that as our knowledge increases, our responsibility to act like God increases as well. And it could extend even to the point of learning to love our bacteria inside of us. So that's my thoughts, and I hope you enjoy that. Thank you.
Strengthen me, strengthen me, strengthen me with raising